Welcome to A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. The Bible tells one big story of redemption, and we want to spend 5 minutes every day journeying through the Bible from start to finish and exploring how all of it points to Jesus.
Hey, we are so glad you're joining us for A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. My name is Katie, and today we're studying Exodus 31 through 33 together. In these chapters, we meet Moses again on Mount Sinai, where he spent 40 days and 40 nights with God, receiving instructions for building the tabernacle, or God's dwelling place among his people. In chapter 31, God finalizes his instructions to Moses. God will fill Hebrew artisans with his spirit so that they can craft pieces of the tabernacle. Isn't that cool? God himself will help build his own dwelling place. God instructs Moses to ensure the Israelites obey the Sabbath, resting every seventh day just as God rested after creating the universe. He even says that anyone who works on the Sabbath must be put to death. Why? It's because God created the Sabbath as a symbol of his people yielding to his law and trusting in his provision. God wraps up his instructions and inscribes 2 tablets with the 10 Commandments with his very own finger. That's right, Moses received 2 tablets of stone that were written on from the very finger of God. Can you imagine seeing God's handwriting? Meanwhile, chaos is happening down at Israel's camp. They had not seen Moses in 40 days and become terrified that their leader would not return. God's people begged Aaron to make them another god to worship. They needed something to believe in. So Aaron gathered gold and created an idol in the shape of a calf. Aaron showed the calf to the people and said, "Here are your gods." And they worshiped. God told Moses what was happening at camp below. His anger grew hot and sought to destroy the wayward Israelites. But something amazing happened. In the midst of God's anger, Moses pleaded on behalf of the Israelites. He reminded God of his covenant to Abraham and Isaac, and God honored Moses' bold step of faith. He didn't destroy the Israelites. Moses went back down the mountain with the tablets of God's writing. He was greeted by dancing and celebration, but it was for the golden calf. Moses was enraged. He smashed the tablets. He ground the golden calf into dust and made God's people drink it. Yuck. Moses instructed them to kill anyone that led the rebellion. About 3,000 died that day. Moses returned to the mountain to again intercede for God's people. He begs God for forgiveness. God tells Moses that he will still protect them as they journey to the promised land, but his presence would not continue with them because of their grave sin. When the Israelites heard this bad news, they mourned. But Moses wouldn't live without God near. He did not take no for an answer. Moses built a tent outside of camp. Here they met and they spoke to God. The Bible describes their meeting as one between friends. Isn't that cool? Moses pleaded with God to remain with them. Moses' time spent with God taught him about God's character. He knew God was a covenant-keeping God. He knew God was a God of forgiveness. And God again honored Moses' persistent faith. He returned his presence to the Israelites. So how do these chapters relate to the gospel? Moses interceded on behalf of the Israelites. He stood between God and God's sinful people. And the Israelites were saved because of Moses' bold faith. Does that sound familiar? Jesus intercedes on our behalf too. We can often be just like the Israelites, running to other things to feel secure. We worship financial stability, relationships, status, our careers. The list goes on and on. But all the while, Jesus stands before the Father and he pleads our case with him. God looks not at our sin, but on Jesus' obedience to him. He looks not at our idolatry, but at Jesus' sinless life. We are given a clean slate. We are given a restored relationship with God. And even more, because of Jesus' obedience, we are given the presence of God that is always with us. But have you ever felt like God was far away? How did you respond? After not seeing Moses or hearing from God in 40 days, the Israelites became restless. They doubted God's very existence. They crafted an item to place their hope in instead of remembering the God who parted the sea for their escape. While they were doubting God, God was preparing Moses to build a tabernacle where he would actually dwell with them. God wasn't far away, and he wasn't silent. He was preparing good things. Let us look at this example in Exodus and take note. How should we respond when God feels far away? Psalm 13 tells us. In this psalm, David feels like God has forgotten him. And at the end, he remembers the character of God. He says, I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. In the midst of feeling alone, David returns to the truth of who he knows God to be. He worships in the waiting. Let us be a little more like David and a little less like the Israelites as we continue this week.